Hello once again. So last time we left off with this paradox where we're screwed. So here's again why we're screwed. We've got this virus that is infecting us at a rate that's greater than us to deal with medical care, exceeds the capacity of our healthcare system. So what we're doing is we're avoiding the virus by social distancing and quarantining. But what's that doing is shutting down our economy. We're losing jobs, we're losing healthcare, we're not able to pay rent. So we're suffocating. So the cure is worse than the disease, is the metaphor. So what do we do? Here's what we do. Here's how we solve this problem. So last week, you guys filled out this survey where we asked if you intend to abide by the lockdown order. And 77% of you responded, yes, I intend to stay in lockdown, and 23% of you didn't. And 23% of you have been getting like some heat in the media this week, because here's Fort Lauderdale this week during spring break, and they're giving these people names like COVID Carla and Corona Chad and stuff like that, which is kind of funny. But it's not just these people which are going to not abide by the lockdown order. These 77% of you down here, there's something that's called compliance fatigue. And the government knows about this. They know there's only so long that people are going to comply by a lockdown order. And that's why they only close schools as a last resort. And that's why they wait as long as they can. Mexico still hasn't shut stuff down because they understand this compliance fatigue, and they're trying to delay the lockdown order as long as possible so that people are still complying when the virus is spreading the fastest. So here is some modeling that was done by Imperial College in Great Britain, and this model was created using data from the spread of influenza, but it is useful. You can change the numbers, change the R naught, and so forth, and you can get some insight into what happens under these different cases. So the black is do nothing, and this is how many people are going to get infected. And this, you can see that, well, the area under this curve pretty much represents everybody. Everybody's going to get infected that would get infected if you do nothing. If you close schools and universities, you can knock the curve down by this much. If you close schools and universities and isolate cases, so figure out who has the disease and get them all by themselves, then you can knock down the curve this much. If you isolate those people and quarantine everybody in their house, you can knock it down this much. So here's their modeling shown a different way. So this blue area represents the period of time in which measures are taken by the government in order to try to knock this curve down. So the black represents do nothing. And if you do the case isolation and the home quarantines and close the schools, what you're doing is, if during that time you're knocking the curve down, but this blue area represents the time at which you're enacting these measures. And after that time, here we are next fall, and boom. So we just delayed what was going to happen anyway. So here people weren't getting sick, and then we stop the measures and everyone goes back to their normal lives, and then bam, we get hammered next fall and winter. So that's not acceptable. So what is acceptable? Well, let's zoom in on this area under this curve right here. That's what's going on over here. They just zoomed in on this. This red line represents the surge capacity of hospitals and intensive care units. So anybody getting sick above this red line is not getting the health care that they need. So if we zoom in on this area, and that's what we're doing down here, we can see that if we isolate cases and quarantine people that are sick and the rest of their households, then we can knock down the curve this much. If we do those things and close schools, we can knock down the curve way more. And you can see that the curve gets knocked down under the capacity of the healthcare, which is good. But here's the kind of tricky part right here. Notice how this is without school closures and this is with school closures. And you're like, what the heck? Why are so many more people getting sick if you're doing more, the government's doing more to keep people from getting sick? And here's why. If we go down here and zoom in, here's the school closures. You're keeping people from getting sick. And remember, this blue area right here is the area in which you're taking the measures. So as soon as you let people go back to school, boom, there's a huge explosion. Whereas here, if you let people go back to school earlier, way back here, more people are going to get sick. But if more people get sick now, then less people get sick later, because once you get this disease and recover, you're immune to it. You're not going to get it anymore, nor are you going to be able to pass it on to anybody else. Okay, so there's two ways we can knock this curve down. We can do what's called mitigation, which are things to reduce R naught or reduce the infectivity of the virus, or we can do suppression, which is to crush the R naught as low as possible. So, well, I'll just show you. So what we're doing right now is mitigation in the United States. So we have closed schools, and that has reduced the R naught, and we're preventing people from getting sick as many would get. So what we could do instead is what China and South Korea did, which is suppression, which is crushing R naught. So it's making it so that the spread of the sickness stops for now. So how is that done? That's done through surveillance. So here is surveillance in a time and place of war. We've got these soldiers have eyes on this territory right here. We got a drone up here and somebody's operating that, and that's got eyes on the territory. If you're fighting an enemy, it's really important to understand what that enemy is doing, because you can change your tactics accordingly. And in the fight against coronavirus, we don't need soldiers with binoculars and drones. What do we need? We need testing. So here are some of the reagents for the testing, and I'll explain how the testing works in another video. But what we need to do is find out who's got the disease. So that's what's going on in South Korea and China, and that's why they've been able to suppress the spread of coronavirus. In South Korea, what they have is a mobile app for your phone. You can punch in your symptoms. They'll say, yes, you're accepted to get a test, or no, you're not. If you are, the app will tell you where to drive your car. You'll drive your car, and then there's mobile testing set up. And then 24 to 36 hours later, on your phone, it pops up whether you're positive for coronavirus or negative. If you're positive, you're put under a quarantine order, and so is everybody in your household. And people check to make sure that you're not leaving your house. Once you are done with that quarantine, you go back, get another test. Once you show 2 negative tests in 48 hours, on your phone appears a validation that you are cleared, that you are recovered from the disease, and you can't pass it on to anybody else, and you can go about your life again. So that is what needs to happen in the United States in order for us to knock the curve down below the capacity of healthcare. So here's what's going on in real life. This is how many tests have been performed per capita or per million of the population. So it's adjusted for population. You can see that United Arab Emirates has done the most testing. South Korea has done quite a bit of testing. Italy, Sweden, United Kingdom, Japan, United States, Vietnam. So we have fallen way behind in testing. I'll give you the kind of like short answer as to why. Back in December, China figured out a test that worked, and they offered that protocol or those instructions to the Centers for Disease Control. And the Centers for Disease Control did what they normally do, which is said, don't worry about it. We can figure out our own test. They did figure out their own test. On February 5th, they shipped it out all over the country, and independent labs started using the tests, and they started finding inconclusive results. They started finding that sometimes the test said the same person was positive or negative. So they reported those inconsistencies, and on February 12th, the CDC confirmed that they had made an error with the testing, and they're still trying to get the protocol ironed out and get the tests produced, the reagents produced and sent out. Surely this is going to be an area of some future investigations, not to bust people, but to figure out what went wrong and why, so we can prevent that from happening in the future. So once we do get those tests up and running, here's the plan. So this shows infections if we do nothing. This shows infections if we do mitigation, which is what we're doing right now. You can see the slope is lower. This shows what happens if we do testing and quarantining with the phone apps and the drive-through testing like South Korea did. So while we suppress it, remember, if we're preventing people from getting it now, that just means that they're going to get it later. So you can't prevent people from getting the disease until a vaccine is developed. So while that suppression is happening, we can learn about the disease. We can understand the cases. We can collect data. We can develop treatments, that's drugs, to make people get less sick, and we can build a vaccine. In the meantime, we need to keep that R0 as low as possible. We need to test, and we need to ban large gatherings. But what we need to do is open up those schools and open up restaurants and businesses as soon as possible. And the way we do that is we know who has it, who doesn't have it, who has had it and recovered. Because if I get the disease and recover, and I can show with a test that that's the case, I can go back to school and I can start teaching you guys up again. Same with you guys. You guys can go back to school. So there is a plan. So what we need to do is realize that we will get by. We will survive. Everything's going to be cool. We know what to do. We just have to do it. I sure do miss you guys, and I hope we get this figured out sooner than later so I can get back in that classroom with y'all and resume the fiesta.